Okay, world history. Welcome back, guys. We are on week 5, day 3. On Monday, we talked a little bit about post World War II and communism in Russia. A little bit, just kind of as an introduction. Yesterday, we talked about uh, apartheid and the Tiananmen Square protests. Today, we're going to stick with the theme of revolutions and reform movements by talking about Berlin. Specifically, we're going to talk about the events that led up to the Berlin Wall. And then I found a source online, Encyclopedia Britannica, with short clips of some of the most iconic moments in that era. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, at the end of World War One, they divided Berlin, up into four quarters, each controlled by the Allies and the Soviet Union. There's a fear that parts of West Germany were getting all of the skilled labor. So the communists in Berlin, they didn't want to lose these people they felt like would have been talented citizens. So they start making it harder to go from East to West Berlin. So here's Europe following the war. And if you're looking at Germany, it's divided up East and West Germany, and then Berlin is divided up into four sections. So people in the East, they saw that life in West Berlin was better. They saw that the quality of life under democratic leadership was better than it was on their side. So Eastern Berliners started moving to West Berlin. And from 1949 to 1961, 2.6 million people escaped to West Germany or West Berlin. So to prevent more people from fleeing communist control, they erected the Berlin Wall. So the IGB is the line that divided East and West Germany. It was established in 1945 and remained in force until 1990. So I was 5. The border was a physical representation of Churchill's metaphor of an iron curtain. I'm not sure if we didn't speak about that in this class. We talked about it in U.S. history, but Churchill gave a very famous speech where he said that an iron curtain has descended upon, I think he says Europe, possibly Germany. But anyway, Churchill is the one that coined that term. And this is like the physical embodiment of an iron curtain. More than separating two territories, each controlled by a separate country, it really was a wall that separated two ideologies. So, Russia, remember from when we talked about World War II, they were kind of an unlikely ally for the United States. The U.S. didn't really like Russia necessarily, but we had a common enemy. We were both fighting the Germans, and Russia was the eastern uh, frontier of the war. So, as soon as the war was over, we were rivals again, and now we were rivals that controlled territories that bordered each other. This is them building the wall. So, what were the impacts? Separated families. Once it was up, you were not allowed to cross it. So, if you lived in a different district than your family, you weren't allowed to see each other. And really, as conditions in East Berlin continued to get worse, and as West Berlin stayed healthy, it turned into more or less a prison wall for the citizens of East Berlin. John F. Kennedy gave a famous speech. We are all Berliners, and we're going to watch a clip of that here in a minute. They had guards with machine guns, barbed wire. They had attack dogs. If you're a historian, as you guys are, then maybe you've heard of um, the JFK speech, but just about everybody knows this one. Ronald Reagan delivered an iconic American speech, really an iconic speech, period, speaking in Berlin to Mikhail Gorbachev, where he famously said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," and everybody cheered. It was definitely a patriotic moment. In June 1987, in a speech at the Brandenburg Gate commemorating the 750th anniversary of Berlin, President Ronald Reagan challenged Mikhail Gorbachev, leader of the Soviet Union, to tear down the Berlin Wall. Here's Gorbachev back here. 2 years later, so 1989, protesters started acting out and staging demonstrations all over East Germany. East Germans called it the Peaceful Revolution. In other words, they weren't taking up arms against their government. They were protesting a policy that they thought was wrong, and they were advocating for change. By November, there were millions and millions of protesters, certainly hundreds of thousands. I don't have the statistics off the top of my head. So soon enough, East Germans were forced to open a number of new border crossings, and after that, Germans were allowed to cross from east to west without a visa, so they could travel freely. The guards started to ease up. I'm going to give that mustache a C minus. On June 13th, 1990, the East Germans officially started dismantling the wall at Bernauer Strafe. The fall of the Berlin Wall was the first step to the reunification of Germany, which was concluded on October 3rd, 1990. The dismantling continued until November 1991. Only a few sections and towers were left standing as memorials. So, what significance did it have? It was not only a physical boundary, between East and West. It was a symbolic boundary as well. So the wall being taken down, it had practical implications, like people could travel from east to west Germany without a visa. But more than that, the wall had become a symbol of oppression. So for it to topple, there was hope that that was going to signal a new day in Germany. And Germany really has, I mean, they're now a democratic nation. So um, let's take a look at some of these speeches, shall we? I found a much better map that shows the division. So East Berlin, West Berlin. East Berlin is controlled completely by the Soviet Union. West Berlin is divided up among the Allies. It's the American territory, it's the British territory, it's the French territory. So we're going to watch Kennedy's Ich bin ein Berliner speech, and then we're going to take a look at something that talks about the Berlin airlift. Then we're going to skip ahead to the wall falling. There's no assignment due today. I encourage you to stick around though and finish out the lesson with me. This is a very interesting time in world history, and it happens to coincide with one of the biggest times in U.S. history.
June 26, 1963. West Berlin awaits the U.S. President. John F. Kennedy. For many, the 45-year-old embodies a new generation of politicians.
We had the feeling we were being ruled by our grandparents. And here was this guy, as fresh and young as we were, like one of us.
The Berliners also expect a statement about the future of Berlin as a divided city. The western part of the city has been surrounded by a wall for 22 months. Moscow and East Berlin want to stop the stream of GDR refugees. The murderous structure divides friends and families. The Soviet Union repeatedly questions the status of West Berlin, and there are tense moments between the two former allies.
We were quiet as mice in the Schöneberg City Hall, like everyone else in the rest of Germany. We were trembling and physically felt how dependent we were.
2 years after the wall is built, more than 400,000 citizens wait in front of the Schöneberg City Hall for the address of John F. Kennedy.
No pop star could have gathered such a huge crowd at that time in Berlin.
It is the first visit of a U.S. president to Berlin since the end of the war. What message will he bring?
It was as if they were in an explosive mood, ready to act. If he said, "Let us march," they might have marched on the wall and torn it down.
But Kennedy said something else.
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
And as he said that famous sentence, there was no stopping us. We started yelling like crazy. The crowds feel protected by Kennedy.
Unbelievable rejoicing. People had tears in their eyes. It was like a liberation.
The president's speech was well prepared. He just had to work on the accent.
We sat together with him in the room of the governing mayor, and he practiced how he should say it with our head translator.
It is an uplifting moment for Kennedy, too.
When we departed, he said, "Phew, we'll never have another day like this as long as we live."
Kennedy's message is...
Little did he know, although Kennedy didn't live for it, there was another moment like that. This guy right here. But we're going to look at that later. Right now, we're going to look at the airlift. So let's take a look at the airlift. It's not what we wanted. By the way, for you young scholars, I encourage you to use Encyclopedia Britannica. It's a terrific source. Excuse me. Excuse me again. Put that on the blooper reel.
The Berlin blockade. The droning motors of the Candy bombers overhead give hope to West Berliners. Since the 24th of June, 1948, West Berlin has been cut off from the world. The Red Army has been ordered to bar all points of entry into the western sections of the city. Rescue by land is impossible. The Americans and British decide to supply the city with food and vital supplies by way of an airlift. The trapped civilians are counting on the Western Allies.
I kept thinking, there's no way they'll allow this to continue. They won't stand for it. They must help us. They will help us.
Countless planes supply the city from the air. 3 secure air corridors have been agreed and are treated as one-way streets. 2 for outbound flights, the middle for return flights. The transporters fly 5 levels above one another, landing in Berlin every 3 minutes.
The first impression was one of constant movement on the runway, aircraft constantly landing and taking off. We pulled up, and the bags came flying down the ramp. It was really pretty hard work.
Up to 700 flights deliver 5,000 tons daily. September 9th, West Berliners demonstrate for freedom. The mayor, Ernst Reuter, addresses them.
Völker der Welt, ihr Völker in Amerika, in England, in Frankreich, schaut auf diese Stadt und erkennt, dass ihr diese Stadt und dieses Volk nicht preisgeben dürft.
His words are both a call for help and a plea to abide. For the children, the airlift is an adventure.
The aircraft came down very slowly, and you could see the crew, the pilot, and the co-pilot. You could see them all, and they always waved to us.
The Americans have a surprise for the children. Little parachutes.
There was chewing gum and some chocolate attached, and it was always a free-for-all as soon as the candy came down. wenn die Dinger rausflogen.
This is how America gains the sympathy of the young. Early 1949. Ever larger aircraft bring ever greater quantities of goods. The Soviet Union recognized that its blockade is failing. During negotiations in New York, the Kremlin finally gives in. The passageways into Berlin are opened. May 12, 1949. Berlin celebrates the end of the blockade. The West has defended its freedom.
We will always remain grateful. They saved us. There's only one thing to say. Hats off. Unbelievable. Great.
Unglaublich. Toll. The air
So the Allies used this airlift as a chance to endear themselves to the Berliners, right? They saw them as saviors because they were the ones um, delivering them these vital goods. So we saw the first iconic speech in Berlin. Now I want to watch the one that, at least in popular culture, is the more relevant one, just in terms of popular culture. And also hugely important in its own right.
In the 1950s, Khrushchev predicted, "We will bury you." But in the West today, we see a free world that has achieved a level of prosperity and well-being unprecedented in all human history. In the communist world, we see failure, technological backwardness, declining standards of health, even.
Uh oh.
And now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state? Or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And with that, what better way to end a lesson on the Berlin Wall? We're going to pick it up right here tomorrow. Guys, good job turning in your assignments. You're on the home stretch. Um, After today, just one more new lesson if you're one of my students that has been turning in your work and staying on top of everything. So keep up the good work. Be nice to your siblings. Don't drive your parents crazy. Talk to you tomorrow.